Hello and welcome to Views on News. I am Jawad Tehami. Being a human, my heart skips a beat and I start getting cramps in my stomach and my mind stops thinking straight and my tongue starts trembling as I am going to narrate an incident of discrimination meted out to Dalit girls in India, and this discrimination was meted out by their teachers. They were asked and forced to put off their school uniforms, but the reason for that was there were two schoolgirls of the upper class that were there in the school in the casual outfits, and they wanted a photo session to happen over there. Now, these two Dalit girls were asked by the concerned teachers to let off their uniforms, but they protested in return, after which the teacher beat them. And not only this, after they were forced to put off their uniforms, they spent 2 hours without clothes in the school premises. Can you just imagine the humiliation, the agony, and the pain of those two little buds who have dreams to become something and contribute to the society? This incident is not in isolation. A young schoolboy was forced to clean toilet by his school principal, after which he contracted dengue. That depicts clearly what is being done to Dalit community in India at the very grassroots level, and that clearly depicts that right from their childhood they are being told that this is your ultimate fate in this country. At the same time, there was another incident. A Dalit youth committed suicide because he was humiliated by the upper class Hindus. And the reason for his crime was that on the road, on his motorcycle, he crossed those upper class Hindus. And what they did in return, they tied him to a tree and then stripped him and then thrashed him. Because of this utter humiliation, he committed suicide. At the same time, two young school boys were beaten to death. They were given the death penalty by whom? Their teachers. For doing what? Just for trying to drink water from a place which is designated exclusively for the upper class Hindus. Back-to-back events of this brutal discrimination towards the Dalit community, and especially towards the young lads, the girls and the boys who are going to the educational institutions with a lot of dreams to become something and contribute to the society. And look what is happening to them. And it is not new. It has been happening for many, many years and decades. And that shows a gloomy picture of what this particular community, which happens to be from within Hindus, is being meted out the kind of brutal discrimination. You can well imagine that what sort of a condition other minorities, including Muslims, including Sikhs, including the Christians, would be given by the Indian authorities. That is exactly what about this particular discriminatory behavior and approach and the high-handedness of Indian authorities and their associates all across India. A universal periodic review conducted by the United Nations Human Rights Council says, I quote, India has undergone a serious regression in human rights under Hindu nationalist BJP government led by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, unquote. Similar sort of concerns raised by the US Commission on International Religious Freedom. And interestingly, there is another dimension to this concern which has been raised by the US Commission on International Religious Freedom by the State Department of the United States of America. Similar sort of concerns raised by the Amnesty International as well. Not only this, this is happening within India. And now let's talk about the UN recognized disputed territory, Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. What is being done over there? On 15th of August in 2019, the special status of Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir was unilaterally snatched by the BJP government, and the Article 370 was scrapped. And what happened afterwards? Over 100,000 Indian troops have been stationed over there. This has been dubbed as the largest open air prison in the entire world. What is happening right now? It's almost 3.5 years now. The continuous curfew and the complete communication blackout is still there. People are being silenced. The journalists, activists are being sent behind the bars, and rape as a war weapon is being used against innocent women over there. The draconian laws like Unlawful Activities Prevention Act and the Public Safety Act are also in place. Now, at the same time, this is what you have seen. It clearly depicts that there is heart of darkness in the very chests of the Indian authorities that belong to Bharatiya Janata Party. On the other hand, in contrast to this particular approach and behavior, the authorities in Pakistan, the way they treat, the respect that is given by the Pakistani authorities and the people to the minorities in particular, and the kind of empowerment that is being given to the female and women segment of the society, that speaks volumes. As Ms. Hina Rabbanikar was a state minister for foreign affairs who recently visited Afghanistan and had negotiations with the interim Afghan government, speaks volumes about the approach of the Pakistani authorities when it comes to women empowerment. And also Foreign Minister Mr. Bilawal Bhutto Zardari is in Bali in Indonesia. He will be participating in the international conference on the Afghan women education and will be highlighting Pakistan's efforts in peaceful and stable Afghanistan. Also will be looking into all these aspects and what the international community needs to do at this particular time in history. Will be talking to our esteemed Gana Lopez joining us in the studio today. But before heading into the discussion, there is a video that is circulating extensively on social media about the plight of Dalit community in India. Let's watch that first.
Is a source of pride for any student, but two Dalit girls belonging to Andhra Pradesh in India didn't know that their pride would be tattered at school. Two teachers, Sunita and Wanda, belonging to the upper class, called these girls to a separate room and ordered them to take off their clothes. Firstly, the girls couldn't understand what was happening, but when the teachers started hitting them, the helpless girls had to take off their clothes and had to spend 2 hours without clothes because two girls belonging to the upper class needed pictures in school uniform for entry in their annual exam, and the girls had not come to school in uniform that day. India is home to the biggest neglected communities in the world. Although being politically and socially independent, the 20 crore Dalits have to face discrimination every day. A large percentage of prisoners in India belong to lower class Hindu. The concept of untouchables is considered unlawful according to the Constitution of India, but there are 40,000 pending cases of injustices against Dalits in Indian courts. Dalit students are mocked, made fun of, and even sexually harassed in Indian school. Teachers belonging to higher class patronize the lower caste Hindus. Caste system is like an epidemic in India. Civilized world will have to eradicate this epidemic of ill treatment of lower caste with the help of United Nations. Just the way UN assisted eradicating polio and malaria. There can't be any bigger lie than India's claim of being the largest democracy in absence of basic rights to the lower.
प्यास लगी बच्चे को तो वो पानी पीने के लिए गया टीचर ने उसको मारा
K.R. Narayan, a man from the lower caste, has been appointed as the president of the country, but the ground realities are very different from what is being projected. The Dalit community in India still faces the same conditions as 3,000 years ago. A few days ago, a 9-year-old Dalit student in Rajasthan was killed by his teachers because he dared to drink water from the place reserved for the upper class Hindus. A teacher illuminates a child's life with knowledge and broadens his horizon, but in India, a teacher subjects the student to the darkness of death. Little did 9-year-old student Indir Kumar Meghwal know that by drinking water from the place of upper class Hindus, he had committed a crime for which he would be sentenced to death. Similarly, in Andhra Pradesh, a 13-year-old Dalit boy was so severely beaten by his upper class teacher that, like Meghwal, he too fought for his life for 9 days before succumbing to his injuries. According to the National Crime Bureau of India, a Dalit is subjected to cruelty and torture every 10 minutes. It is sad that even after 75 years of independence, the culture of caste discrimination is still prevalent, although many laws have been made in this regard. It has not happened for the first time that Dalit boys have been forbidden to drink water from utensils of higher class Hindus. 100 years ago, famous Dalit politician Babu Jagjeevan Ram had to go through the same humiliation in his school, although he was lucky that his life was saved. His daughter, while remembering the inhuman treatment meted out to her father, tweeted that, 100 years ago, my father Babu Jagjeevan was forbidden to drink from a water pitcher of upper class Hindus. The lower classes are deprived of basic human rights. Dalit community camps in India resemble Nazi German concentration camps. It is the misfortune of every Dalit that they are born in the great India, where their fortunes are not written by God but by upper class Hindus.
The Dalit camps in India are lesser than the concentration camps in Nazi Germany. You just watch that video. Let me bring in our panelists. We are honored to have been joined in the studio by Dr. Waleed Rasool. He's a Kashmiri leader. Dr. Rasool, thank you very much for your time, for being on Views on News. And we are also honored to have been joined in the studio by Mr. Amir Hussain. He's senior journalist. Mr. Amir Hussain, thank you very much for your time also. And we are also honored to have been joined in the studio by Barrister Hamayun Sarfraz Chattha. He is legal expert and political analyst. Barrister Chattha, thank you very much for your time, for being on Views on News. We're also honored to have been joined on the Skype at the same time by Dr. Jamil Khan. He's former ambassador. Dr. Jamil Khan, thank you very much for your time, also for being on Views on News. Let me begin the discussion with you, Dr. Jamil Khan. As you just heard that video, according to the National Crime Bureau of India, every 10 minutes a Dalit is subjected to caste cruelty and torture. Now, don't you think this shows a deep-rooted mindset across India when it comes to its treatment, especially towards the Dalit community?
Well, it's a demonstration of the mindset of the leadership in India, mindset of the leaders in BJP, mindset which has been trained and which has been seasoned over a period of so many decades. The leader of the Indian government himself had joined RSS while he was only about 17 years old. So imagine the way he has been mentored and the way he has been groomed. So now we can see the reflection of all what we've been discussing from time to time, and the world has been discussing from time to time, that very mindset and that very euphoria of upper class and the RSS mindset, which they had really prepared that mind and prepared those people for a different purpose, but they are also using it for their own lower class, they say, people like Dalits. Now, you have already shown your documentary. Now, if we draw the comparison, if we draw the analysis of it, that comes under the international violation of international law, including the US law, which has been issuing every year the religious freedom report. And they have also enunciated in that report that anyone who is violating the religious freedom can come under the sanction, bilateral sanction of the United States. Now, having said so, let me quickly, just 2 seconds each. Now, there are about 4 to 5 international laws, and that's a religious freedom, which is also that means the obligation of the regional bodies, and also declaration of the elimination of all forms of intolerance, and this is also an discrimination. This is also an international law, and then the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights. So all these laws are there, and the last but not the least is the Universal Declaration of the Human Rights. So they are committing and they are violating the international law and international instrument. Now, the bigger question is that how are they getting scot-free? They are getting scot-free the way they have been getting scot-free, by doing all kind of atrocities on the Kashmiris. And once you go to that section, perhaps that would be the right time to throw some light on it. But there's some kind of a parallel to what they're doing with the other minorities, including Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, and other minorities. What they are doing with them.
Khan, beg your pardon for the interruption. Your point is well taken. A very important and pertinent points you have highlighted. I'll come back to you, especially when it comes to the international law and the treaties and the declarations from the United Nations, which have been enunciating the rights of the minorities and especially the dignity of the humanity as a whole across the world. Let me bring in Dr. Rasool also in the discussion. Dr. Rasool clearly depicts the deep-rooted mindset within India. We see marginalization of other communities, including Muslims, Christians, as well as Sikhs. But when it comes to Dalits, they happen to be Hindus themselves, just because of the social stratification that has gone so deep-rooted across the society. That shows what do you think has inculcated and worsened the situation over the years in India?
A lot of things have been written in research, policy making, that when some mindset surpasses the certain degree of ideology, and I have wrote on a paper on it that the Hindutva had crossed the Moditva. The Moditva is now a political philosophy of the India, which was Sam, Dam, Dand, Bed. Now it has been surpassed in certain circles and in certain dimensions, because when you are bringing the pan-Hinduism on cards, then you have only one card to play, that is to bring Maratha Brahmanism in the play. Now Modi brought that Brahman Maratha Hindu panism on the play, and it is why that when you are banking upon the politics of hatred, you are cashing this dividend in the vote bank. So this is one issue. Number two is that if you compare the Hindu fascism, now the 9 rules when fascism, when the nine types of rules you are fulfilling, then you have crossed the fascism. Same fascism which was Hitler, Stalin and Mussolini. Same is the situation in India. Third, the caste system is the basic fundamental of Hinduism, that it is not a religion but a divided segment. So the superiority of the Brahmana is always maintained, it is always paramount. So definitely when you are maintaining certain degree of political thought, then you are converting that vote bank into the other side of the divide. So why now if you are discussing the current India, now it is the state which is ultimately promoting the so-called democracy, and behind democracy,
but on the ground,
fascist state.
On the ground, the situation is
fascism,
180 degrees.
Same racism which was
opposite.
exercised by
Amir
Stalin and Hitler.
As we all know, the Indian constitution and India boasts itself to be the largest secular democracy in the world, and its constitution categorically abolishes untouchability. Despite that clear enunciation in the Indian constitution, the ground reality is quite otherwise. Why do you think is that so?
This is really tragic to see how the India has been degenerated into an autocratic Hindu fascist state. The Brahminic, the class that has been dominating the Indian supremacy for a long time, and the reconstruction of history even. We see the rebirth of Shiva, the rebirth of the old Indian deities which dominated the Hindu supremacy, and it excluded a vast majority from the rule and from the system of governance in India is returning now with a vengeance. Indian perhaps society could not survive the secular posture that was written and enshrined in their constitution in 1949. The constitution was straightforward, but of course, from the beginning, if you look at the Indian inclination towards a majoritarian dictatorship, which is now expressing itself in Hindu fascism, has excluded not only 200 million Dalit, but also 200 million Muslims and many millions Christians and Sikhs. So if you look at the overall democratic values, if you calculate those figures, the total number of people who have been marginalized, who have been victimized, are almost in their combination, they constitute 50% of Indian population. So what kind of democracy is that, where 50% population is extremely excluded and marginalized and victimized on daily basis? So this kind of fascist regime is pampered through the temples. There's huge money and gold that goes into temples, and they create this political and religious legitimacy for Hindu fascism, where they try to carve out a Hindu state which is ruled by Brahmin, which has a historical, I don't know there's any history of recall, because Hinduism has never been a religion in the past. It was a hodgepodge of different cultures, traditions, they came together, and they're trying to create a religion out of nowhere, and the religion which will be dominated by a certain thugs.
Class of Hindus on the basis of social
The
stratification.
class, yeah.
That's
The
what you mean to say.
stratification has
Let me bring in Barrister
Absolutely.
Chattha also into the discussion. Barrister Chattha, as we are already discussing, and we have already also share with you, and that video that you also saw, back-to-back events, and that kind of exclusive approach, especially after 2014 when BJP took over the reins of power in India. The violence and that discrimination is turning out to be more brutal with every single passing day. The concerns have been raised by the international human rights organizations as well, certain other major world capitals as well. Why do you think, despite all this, and there's so much condemnation, concern being raised by the international community at the same time, why do you think Indian authorities belonging to BJP in particular remain so stubborn and obstinate not to give heed to all those concerns and calls?
You have raised a very valid question. I think Indian authorities, the major issue is India's lack of seriousness towards these human rights violations, and I think the state is perpetuating or supporting those elements in their very own right. And I would say this is called in India the resurrection of the Hinduism, they call it, and they are the rise of nationalism in India is already in the process. I think it is part of that. They want to create an environment where they can bring an image of India where Hinduism will play a key part, and they are parting their ways from secularism. So I think, and being a lawyer, my major concern is the lack of lack of actions by the functionaries or the state functionaries, and the lawlessness of, and at the same time the violation of the constitution. I would say Indian courts are also not responding to these human rights violations, and minorities are constantly being denied of their political and civil rights, and the violations have not only affected their dignity of their bodies, but they are being denied of education, they are denied of health facilities.
So Barrister Chattha, as you already mentioned, a very important point when it comes to the role and the responsibility of the Indian judicial system after such brutal discrimination that is being meted out to all the minorities over there in India, with that exclusive approach of being the Hindu-led democracy. Now, what don't you think the responsibility of Indian judicial system at this point in history increases manifold? And if it is not, and it should be unbiased, and if it is not being unbiased, so is it being controlled by the BJP-led regime?
Well, I think the Indian judiciary is continuously including judges which are prone to Hinduism, and we can see a very recent examples where they have decided against the Muslim laws and the other minorities. They are not protecting them, they are not allowing them to take benefit of the protection of law. So I think the judiciary is very systematically supporting all the extremist elements. Or there could be another aspect of that government or the state is not giving them room to protect, to give the protection to the affectees.
Right, Dr. Jamil Khan, let's bring in that case of a young lad who was forced by his principal to clean the toilets of the school. Now, that clearly shows that the Indian mindset that is so prevalent over there that makes them, the Dalit community in particular, to have that very notion right from their childhood that this is going to be your ultimate fate, and as an adult you don't have that much future prospects of excelling and competing in the national mainstream. Your take on this, sir?
Yeah, well, what a conflict, you know. India on one hand is claiming all over the world and taking advantage of it as a secular nation, as a democratic nation. And on the other hand, thousands of years old, this discrimination within the Hinduism, lower caste and upper caste. So they are still practicing that. Despite the fact that the reports of human rights, the reports, even United States report on the religious discrimination, published several times. The last one, again, India was clearly mentioned about it, and with a very comprehensive illustration of all what is happening around in terms of religious discrimination. But despite that, they are carrying on with the agenda which they have formed over a period of time. And it is again orchestrated by the government, by the BJP government. Now, what has happened, the lethal combination is that those indoctrination of mind which has taken place for the last so many decades, and that indoctrination is now being transformed into atrocities, including what is happening on the Dalits. And see, the human dignity is being violated, and the human dignity is the way that's being...
Right, Dr. Jamil Khan, you already also mentioned there is a universal periodic review conducted by the United Nations Human Rights Council, which I already quoted, but there is another dimension to it. At the same time, the US Commission on International Religious Freedom says, let me quote, the Indian government's policies negatively affect Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, Dalits, while the body clearly recommends that American administration should designate India as a country of a particular concern and impose sanctions on individuals and entities responsible for religious persecution. But interestingly, we have seen a very different sort of an approach by the State Department itself, and there was a clarification after there was an objection made by the US Commission on International Religious Freedom that the US State Department didn't include India in that list. There was an explanation that goes on to say that given the totality of facts and the circumstances determined that religious freedom concerns in India do not warrant a country of a particular concern designation or placement on the special watch list. Why such a dichotomy?
Well, the proponent of the human rights, proponent of the discrimination, of religious discrimination, the reports which you just mentioned, all of these things definitely demonstrate that the international political priorities are altogether different, and that subdues the violations of the international laws and including their own law. This report is written under their own framework of legal system of United States. And they have very clearly stipulated that if the bilateral sanction doesn't work, then the same thing can be referred to the United Nations, and United Nations under Chapter 6, or if needed, and there to be if they want to take some severe action, Chapter 7 of the UN Charter could be imposed. But it's not happening, and they are not even recognizing that because of the geopolitical development which is taking place, containment of China, and their own priority of a string of alliance in the Indian Ocean and against the string of pearls. So the story goes, at a very strategic and a very geopolitical level, that the interest of the United States somehow ignores such violation, which the Americans were once known that they would not tolerate such violations, a violation of religious discrimination, human rights. But this is what is happening, and they have even tolerated the two commissions of the human right. The commissioner of the human right has already mentioned those reports, or there has narrated the contents of those two reports in front of the world media in regard to the Kashmiris, but nothing has happened even in that. So your question, one-liner answer to your question is that the geopolitical priorities of the United States is somehow attaining more importance as compared to the violation of their own law and the international laws which I just mentioned. So from that standpoint, we should not be expecting, and not to that end, if I would also remind your viewer and draw their attention of how some of the resolutions have been vetoed, even at the very start, once the Kashmir atrocities were being moved as a resolution. So the only answer is that unless the multilateral influence is brought on even these bigger countries.
Right. Dr. Jamil Khan, this is another very important point. I'll come back to you with this particular point to discuss it later in the show. Dr. Rasool, when there are so many concerns which have been raised by the United Nations, Human Rights Council, also the US Commission on International Religious Freedom, the State Department doesn't include India's name in the list of the countries of particular concern. Do you agree with what Dr. Jamil Khan already elaborated?
Yeah, geopolitical, geoeconomic and geostrategic compulsions drive the geopolitics. So politics is there, number one. Number two, when you are successfully hiding some crimes behind the democracy and there is a particular media agenda setting, it works. But you have seen that aggression, you cannot continue aggression up to maximum time. You have to answer certain things. And number third, the international laws are always for the weaker one. It helps weaker one. So we must pursue. It is a compulsion of the weaker one to pursue the law and to get some relief. And number fifth is when you are talking about the geopolitical compulsions, it depends upon the relationship between the two nations. What is our and what is Indian relationship with superpowers, and how superpowers get the dividend from the relationships to conceal the human rights. And human rights is once again selective, because the main purpose of United Nations to change the United Nations from the House of Nations was the main purpose was to help the weaker one. But when you are starting the class struggle and you are promoting the certain class, that the selective monolithic religion dominates than other things, and he wants to continue that constituency which is bank upon the hatred.
Right. Mr. Amir Hussain, this explanation by the State Department regarding the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom's report and its recommendation of imposing sanctions on the entities and the individuals which are involved in the persecution of minorities in India. This explanation, which I have already quoted from the State Department, does such a statement embolden the attitude and the approach of Indian authorities?
Well, I think you are right. Absolutely, it has been mentioned earlier that the violation of all international conventions and the covenants and even the domestic laws and the constitution, it comes at a time when Indian atrocities are being defended by the big business interest. The Hindutva has become a selling proposition. The saffron ideology has become a corporate insignia in India. So you see the nexus between business interest and in the rising Hindutva. Both are interlinked and both are creating a sort of middle class within India, the fundamentalist Hindu middle class, which will go for buying anything without thinking beyond their commodities and all that. So the commodification of the values, the commodification of culture, the commodification of a fascist Hinduism that has worked for Indian ideological hegemony, which is coming from Hindutva ideas and RSS fundamental ideology of discriminating against anyone who is not who doesn't fit into the doctrine of a Brahmin Hindu supremacist ideology. And I think this we have to decouple, we have to understand that the Indian business classes and the corporate sector is linked with global corporates, and there is an international investment coming in from different directions. So the investment does not care about who rules a country. They care about the capital, how capital is being invested, how the results are being generated. Having said that, it is now compulsion of international community, the humanitarian organizations, the
right.
UN.
Now, regarding we see this sort of an approach and the behavior by the Indian authorities, which is led by BJP right now in India. We see a different approach and the attitude of the Pakistani authorities. Pakistan, when we specifically talk about bringing in the regional stability, Pakistan had been playing a pivotal role when it comes to peace and stability in the war-ravaged Afghanistan as well. But at the same time, we saw the multiple proofs and evidences that Indian authorities played part of a peace spoiler over there. So, and Pakistani sacrifices being acknowledged and recognized worldwide. Your take on that, sir?
Yeah, I think Pakistan has always been for peace and stability in the region. Every time when we go for negotiation with India for the larger peace and for the coexistence of more than 1 billion of people in subcontinent, India has always shown a different path, arrogance, the being a big state and all that. But I think Pakistani sacrifices need more acknowledgement at international level, because Pakistan has always been engaging not only India but the other neighboring countries and international community to bring this point
right.
home.
Barrister Chattha, recently we saw Minister of State for Foreign Affairs, Ms. Hina Rabbani Kar, went to Afghanistan. She interacted with the interim Afghan government, and now Foreign Minister Mr. Bilawal Bhutto Zardari is in Bali, Indonesia. He'll be attending the international conference on the Afghan women education over there. Speaks volumes about the kind of measures the Pakistani authorities have been doing over the number of years and currently doing in order to give that empowerment to women and the female segment of the society.
I think it is a very good development. The international community has, I think, imposed a condition on Afghanistan that the improvement of women's rights will be the key element in their integration into the international community. And Pakistan, I think in this regard, is playing a very important role, and they are using their influence to make them look into the plight of women and especially into the women education. I think it is a very it will give a very pleasant effect to the women who are suffering under the Taliban regime. And I think it is for the Taliban to understand that the international realities and demand education for women, and people look into the states which are prone to giving rights to the women. So it is, I think it is time that Pakistan
Right, Dr. Jamil Khan, your take regarding these sort of measures by the Pakistani authorities to empower the female segment of the society and putting them at the key roles and to contribute to the national affairs and to the society at the same time. At the same time, we see the kind of treatment that is being meted out within India to the female strata of the society, and especially when we talk about Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Rape has been used by the Indian paramilitary forces and also the army troops over there as a weapon of war. So what does the international community needs to do in this regard?
All these atrocities and all these violations has been tabulated in the two commission reports which I was mentioning earlier. And those commission reports are the human rights commissioners had formulated through the Human Rights Council. And India, until now, one of the recommendations in that was that they would allow the Human Rights Commission reporters to go to Kashmir, but they were not allowed so far. Again, the same thing comes in what we were discussing about the geopolitical and geoeconomic priorities. This Hanarbani Kur's visit has really resonated a very significant signals to the entire world. Without scarf, visiting a land which is so stubborn about the education of the women and the women empowerment and the women right. I would draw your attention and the attention of your viewers on the Security Council resolution, which was very candid and very categorical last year after the Afghan Taliban had taken over on the 26th of August, and then second resolution on the in the last week of September, in which the world community, through the Security Council resolution, had very clearly stipulated that Afghan Taliban would have a regard to human rights, children's rights, minority rights, and education of the children.
Right, your point is well taken. Dr. Jamil Khan, unfortunately, we're short of time. We'll have to include certain other things regarding this entire discussion. We can conclude that we see a number of proofs that there are many, more than a dozen separatist movements within India. They are gaining momentum, and India needs to rectify its behavior, and the international community needs to play a role. The news just in, it's a big breaking news. British publication, The Mail on Sunday, and news site Mail Online on Thursday apologized to Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif for an error in an article it published on July the 4th, 2019, in which it had accused the Premier of stealing British foreign aid money. British publication, The Mail on Sunday, and the news site Mail Online on Thursday has apologized to Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif for an error in an article it published on July the 4th, 2019, in which it had accused the Premier of stealing British foreign aid money. A vindication for Pakistan's Prime Minister Mr. Shehbaz Sharif. The said news story, written by the investigative journalist David Ross, has now been removed from the publication's website and other platforms also. The article had claimed that Shehbaz had embezzled funds allegedly provided by the UK's Department for International Development for the rehabilitation of 2005 earthquake while he was the Chief Minister Punjab. Now, this is a major vindication, and the publication house which published this story has now removed it, and it has also apologized to the Prime Minister. Let me repeat it again. British publication The Mail on Sunday and news site Mail Online on Thursday apologized to Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif for an error in an article it published on July the 4th, 2019, in which it had accused the Premier of stealing British foreign aid money. The sad news story, written by investigative journalist David Ross, and has now been removed from the publication's website and other platforms. And we had already discussed the plight of Dalits in India and the kind of discrimination that is being meted out to the other minorities, including Muslims, Sikhs and Christians also, and the role and the responsibility of the international community in this regard. We were joined in the studio by Barrister Hamayun, Sarfraz Chattha, legal expert, political analyst, and Dr. Waleed Rasool, Kashmiri leader, and Mr. Amir Hussain, senior journalist. And on Skype, we were joined by Dr. Jamil Khan, former ambassador. Thank you very much, all of you gentlemen, for your time at Views on News tonight. It was really an enlightening discussion. With this, we come to the end of today's Views on News. Until the next one, take good care of yourselves.